What would you do if, in the middle of a freezing New York night, a little girl walked into a fortress of steel and glass, clutching a pink backpack and whispered, "Please, hide me from my father"? If stories of courage, redemption, and healing speak to your heart, please subscribe and stay with us until the final chapter of this journey. The skyscraper rose above Midtown Manhattan like an iron sentinel, its mirrored skin reflecting the storm that swept along Madison Avenue. Inside, Whitmore Capital's headquarters glowed with sterile light. It was 2 in the morning, yet the boardroom on the 40th floor hummed with voices sharp as the icy wind outside. Jonathan Whitmore, the man whose name crowned the building, stood at the head of the long mahogany table. His silver cufflinks glinted under the recessed lights. Around him, 11 other shareholders, bankers, attorneys, former intelligence officers, leaned in with grave expressions. A federal lawsuit loomed, threatening to pierce the armor of their empire. They had convened in secret to forge a strategy, a midnight council in a city that never slept. "Without decisive action, this lawsuit will cripple our liquidity within weeks," said Victor Hale, an ex-Wall Street trader turned philanthropist. "We need contingency funds offshore, or we'll bleed in public." Sarah Mitchell, the only woman among them, tapped her pen against a thick binder. A lawyer renowned in New York's family court, she spoke with precise calm. "Funds won't matter if discovery exposes internal vulnerabilities. If we're blindsided by evidence, it won't just be liquidity. It'll be prison time for some." Murmurs rippled across the table. Jonathan raised his hand, silencing them. His reputation was built not on inherited wealth, but on a ruthless clarity in storms like this. "We focus on containment. Nothing leaks. Nothing leaves this room." The words had barely settled when a sound drifted into the boardroom. Something small. Something wrong. A door latch clicked, and the glass wall of the lobby beyond revealed a figure none of them expected. A child. She appeared impossibly fragile against the towering security desk and polished marble floors. Snow clung to her coat like frost on glass, her hair damp, cheeks raw from the wind. In her arms hung a scuffed pink backpack decorated with stickers of stars and kittens. Her eyes, pale blue trembling, scanned the silent hall of power. Jonathan frowned. The building's lower levels were guarded around the clock. No child should have passed through those doors, much less into their sanctum at this hour. He stepped out of the boardroom, the others following as if pulled by the gravity of the scene. The girl's lips quivered. Her voice, when it came, was a whisper that sliced through the air sharper than any accusation. "Please, can you hide me from my father?" For a moment, no one spoke. The storm howled against the glass, filling the silence they could not. Jonathan crouched, his tailored suit folding awkwardly against the polished floor. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She clutched the backpack tighter, as if it alone could shield her. "Emily. Emily Carter." The name struck Sarah first. Her eyes widened. Richard Carter was no stranger in Manhattan's legal circles. A businessman with an empire built on shadowy contracts. A man whispered to launder cartel money through shell corporations. The room stiffened with the recognition that the storm outside had just walked through their door in the form of a trembling 6-year-old child. Jonathan extended a hand, careful not to touch her without consent. "Emily, you're safe here. Why are you running from your father?" Her gaze darted toward the revolving doors, as if expecting monsters to emerge. She shook her head violently, tears threatening to spill. "He hurt Mommy. He said if I told anyone, I'd disappear too." The weight of those words pressed on every heart in the room. These were millionaires, titans accustomed to hostile takeovers and market collapses. Yet nothing in their world of power prepared them for the sight of innocence bruised by betrayal. Behind Jonathan, The shareholders exchanged glances. Skepticism, concern, calculation. Was this a trap? A child's fantasy? Or had fate truly delivered living evidence of crimes they all knew whispered in the corridors of Wall Street? Sarah knelt beside Jonathan, her legal instincts flaring. "Emily, do you have something with you?" Emily's small hands trembled as she tugged the zipper of her backpack. The metallic rasp echoed louder than the wind outside. She pulled it open just enough to reveal the outline of objects within, a blade smeared dark, a small camera, and something that glittered with digital menace, a Hello Kitty-shaped USB drive. The sight froze them all. Her whisper returned, quieter, deadlier. "I kept everything. Mommy said one day someone would believe me." Jonathan's chest tightened. In all his years negotiating billion-dollar mergers, he had never felt so unsteady. Around him, 11 people of extraordinary power stood stripped of their defenses by the plea of a single child. Outside, the snow thickened, muffling the city's roar. Inside, the air vibrated with a truth none of them could dismiss. Whitmore Capital's Midnight Council was no longer about survival of a corporation. It had become something larger, something irreducibly human. Jonathan drew a slow breath, the decision already burning into his bones. He looked at the girl and then at his fellow shareholders. "She came to us," he said firmly. "That means we don't turn away." Emily's eyes flickered with the first fragile light of trust. She whispered once more, her voice so faint it might have been mistaken for the storm. Yet every ear caught it. "Please, don't let him find me." The 12 millionaires of Whitmore Capital, men and women who had built fortresses of wealth to shield themselves from the world, found themselves standing as sentinels for a child's fragile life. And in that instant, the night's agenda, the lawsuit, the risk, the empire, shattered beneath the weight of something far greater, the desperate plea of a 6-year-old girl who had slipped through the cracks of New York's endless night. The lobby's hush felt like the pause between a lightning flash and the thunder that follows. Emily stood beside the security desk, boots leaving half-moons of melting snow on the marble. Jonathan signaled to the night supervisor to lock the revolving doors and cut the external lights on the street level. The city outside could swallow secrets. Tonight, he needed the building to keep one. "Conference room B," he said, voice steady but low. "No windows." Sarah Mitchell guided Emily gently, not by the elbow, that would be too much contact, but by walking half a step ahead like a lighthouse. The other shareholders fell in behind: Victor Hale, Dr. Marcus Levin, a trauma surgeon whose hands had once rebuilt lives in Kandahar, Maya Chen, a cyber forensics savant, and the rest of the Midnight Council, 12 people forged in different kinds of storms. In Conference B, the light was softer, the table smaller, the air warmer. Jonathan waved off the catering trays left from some forgotten meeting. He removed his coat, folded it into a square, and placed it on a chair. "For your backpack," he said to Emily, so the wet wouldn't stain the leather seat. She nodded, the smallest movement of trust. Sarah crouched to Emily's eye level. "You're in control," she said. "You decide what we see and when we stop. Do you understand?" Emily's blue eyes, rimmed with fatigue, held Sarah's for 3 brave seconds. Then she tugged open the zipper. First came the blade, a small kitchen knife wrapped in a dish towel printed with faded lemons. The cloth was stiff in places, dried to a dark brown. Dr. Levin inhaled sharply. "Don't touch the handle," he said quietly. "And let's photograph it in place." Maya was already moving. She peeled a pair of nitrile gloves from a wall cabinet. Whitmore Capital had learned from experience that risk lived in fingerprints and keystrokes, and slid them on. She pulled her phone, enabled airplane mode, killed Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, then opened a camera app with embedded timestamps and hash verification. The quiet chirp of the shutter felt sacramental. Next came a children's point-and-shoot camera, pink with a cracked corner, stickers of stars rubbed thin by nervous thumbs. The battery cover was taped on. "I filmed," Emily whispered, cheeks heating with shame she should never have had to know. Not when it was bad, just after. "Mommy said photos help people believe." "And you were very brave to do that," Sarah said, her voice a silk ribbon over barbed wire. "What else, Emily?" The last object slid across the folded coat and stopped with a weight far greater than its grams, a Hello Kitty USB drive on a frayed silver chain. It looked harmless, like a trinket from a midtown souvenir shop. Maya's gaze sharpened. "Cat-shaped grenade," she murmured. "Tell us how you got it," Jonathan asked, careful to keep curiosity from turning into interrogation. Emily twisted the chain. "Daddy keeps computers in a room at home. No windows, 3 locks. When he drinks, he forgets one. I can pick the little lock with a hair clip. Mommy taught me to braid. I learned how metal goes." She swallowed. "I copied the newest folder. I had to make 2 trips because the files were heavy." Victor's brow furrowed. "Heavy how?" "She means large," Maya said. "Too big for one copy." Sarah felt the ground tilt beneath them. A knife, a camera, a drive. And a child who knew the geometry of locks because childhood had given her blueprints of fear. "We proceed by the book," she said, more to the room than to herself. "Chain of custody starts now." Maya laid out a clean legal pad and, in block letters, wrote, "Evidence log, Emily Carter, 0203 Estant." She annotated each item, recording description, condition, time, and initial handler, sealing temporary evidence bags from the emergency compliance kit in the cabinet, because big companies learned, after a few very public stumbles, that being ready for raids also meant being ready for truth. Jonathan pulled the shades on the interior windows. No one leaves. No calls outside the VPN. Air-gapped machines only. It sounded like a hostile takeover protocol because it was, except the hostile was the past, and the target was a little girl's future. Maya's fingers hovered over the USB. "I'll image the drive, not mount it. We don't alter a single bit." She turned to Emily. "Is that okay?" Emily nodded once. Maya threaded the drive onto a hardware write blocker no larger than a matchbox, then into an isolated laptop with a fresh solid-state drive pulled from a sealed anti-static bag. A small progress bar inched forward, a digital candle burning through the dark. Dr. Levin leaned toward the knife, careful as a prayer. "These stains are old," he said. "Days, at least. And those lines, that's transfer spatter. Kitchen towel used after a blunt event." Emily's hands went to her ears. Sarah reached out, stopped, and instead mirrored the girl's posture, hands near her own ears, until Emily blinked at the strange adult copying her and managed a breath that didn't fracture on the way out. The imaging completed with a soft chime. Maya verified the hash. 2 lines of alphanumeric truth that would stand up in any courtroom if they lived to see one. "We're good. I'm going to parse directory structure only." Folders bloomed on the air-gapped screen like bruises under skin. Oakspan, ledger, camera, inside. Maya's throat tightened. "Oakspan is a shelf corporation registered in Delaware," she said. "Seen it before, never proved it. Ledger could be a bait folder. Let's start with camera." She opened the directory. Thumbnails spilled into a grid, dates stamped in the lower right corner, the most recent from 3 nights ago. Sarah's hand closed into a fist, nails biting palm, as the first image resolved. A woman in a kitchen, right cheek swollen, blood at the hairline, eyes looking somewhere past the lens as if focusing on survival itself. "My mother," Emily said. Her voice was steady in the way ice is steady while the river beneath it pounds. "Her name is Grace." The second image. The same kitchen. A glass shattered on tile, crimson spidering through white grout. Third, a close-up of a forearm, yellowing bruise in the shape of 4 fingers. Fourth, a doorway splintered near the lock. Fifth, a page torn from a notebook with a phone number and the words, "If gone, run to Whitmore," written in blocky adult letters. Sarah's eyes stung. "Who told you to come here, Emily?" Emily pointed to the note on the screen with one trembling finger. "Mommy. She cleaned offices sometimes. This one too. She said the Big W building has people who fight with money and words and sometimes with truth." Jonathan felt the room shift around him, like an elevator beginning to move without warning. He had built a tower and filled it with brilliance, but he had never expected to be the destination on a mother's escape map. He swallowed the complicated ache the thought brought with it and nodded. "All right," he said, as if answering Grace across the distance. "All right." Maya clicked over to Ledger. Inside were spreadsheets with bland names that meant everything. Q1 reconciled, XLSX, vendors CSV, capital flows final.xl-x. She opened the last file, columns populating, date, origin, intermediary, destination, amount, memo. The numbers marched like soldiers. The memos whispered their betrayals. "Wire transfers segmented at $9,800, Maya said. Structuring to duck reporting thresholds. Cayman intermediaries. A Nevis trust. And look, consulting fee recurring to G. Carter." "Grace?" Sarah asked, a spark of fear catching. "Could be a different Carter," Victor said, but the words felt like a lifeline tossed to a storm that had already swallowed the deck. Maya continued. Another memo. Sanitary masks, South Terminal. That's a known cartel code for cash concealment at airports. She flipped to metadata. These sheets were generated from a program named Ledgersmith, proprietary. Whoever runs this knows what they're doing. "Richard," Sarah said. "He's been a rumor wrapped in a shell company for years. Cartel valves, charity veneer. We never had a witness, never had internal files, until tonight." Jonathan breathed out, slow and controlled. "We have what the government could never buy." Emily stood on tiptoe, looking at the pixelated map of her own childhood. "There's a folder called Inside," she said. "I think it's movies. I didn't watch." Maya opened Inside. There were short clips, muted, choppy, captured by the little camera resting on the table. The first video opened to a narrow field, the lower half of a man's torso, a hand sweeping the camera from the counter, the sound of a door banging open. Sarah lifted a palm. "Stop there. We've seen enough to authenticate. We don't need to relive it." But another file caught Maya's eye. 22office.move. She clicked. The angle shifted to a room with a glass wall and a city skyline beyond. In the reflection, a man, Richard Carter, spoke on the phone. Pacing. "Move every block through Oakspan West. If the compliance team flags us, the bank's already paid. No one touches this without my signature." He turned, face clear as daylight in the reflection. "And keep the girl quiet." They all exhaled at once. The collective recognition of a face, a voice, a confession disguised as logistics. Maya paused the clip, printed a screenshot to the air-gapped printer, and slid the warm paper to Sarah. The lawyer studied it the way a diver reads a pressure gauge. "Direct admissions," she said, voice hushed, "and probable cause across state lines." "This belongs to a federal courtroom." Victor rubbed his temples. If we move this, we declare war. We didn't start it, Jonathan said. He looked at Emily, who was folding the dish towel with the precision of a child, trying to make chaos behave. But tonight, it ended up on our doorstep. Sarah straightened. The room sharpened around the line she was about to draw. Listen to me, she said, scanning each face. In 15 minutes, men will arrive who smile like consultants and ask to help steward this sensitive matter. They will represent banks, interests, reputations. Some will be friends. None will be on Emily's side. Silence. The truth had a gravity that pulled speech into its orbit. We file an emergency protective petition in New York Family Court as soon as the sun is up, Sarah continued. Temporary guardianship, emergency removal. We secure a court-ordered chain of custody. And before that, we notify the NYPD's Special Victims Unit and log a federal tip with the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force. Not because we want headlines, but because a child's testimony should never be buried under somebody's quarterly guidance. And until then? Victor asked. Until then, Sarah said, we keep watch. A sound, barely a sound, made them turn. Emily had stepped closer to the table, her small palm hovering over the printed still of her father's reflected face. She didn't touch it. She simply looked, and in the soft set of her mouth was a verdict that belonged to no court. You asked what we do, Jonathan said to the room, but also to himself. We do not turn away. Emily's shoulders eased a fraction. She closed the backpack with a firm, final zip, then placed it in the middle of the table like a standard around which an army might gather. Outside the sealed windows, New York kept snowing. Inside, 12 millionaires, so practiced in measuring risk and return, found themselves confronted with the one asset that could not be purchased and must not be squandered: a child's trust. They stood, and the fortress of steel and glass, for the first time in its life, felt like a sanctuary. The night in Manhattan carried its own rhythm, a muffled throb of taxis on slick asphalt, the hiss of snow against steel, the sirens muted as if swallowed by the storm. Inside Whitmore Capital's tower, however, the air felt brittle. Each second stretched taut like a violin string on the edge of snapping. Jonathan stood at the head of Conference B, the pink backpack sealed in an evidence bag at the center of the table. Around it, 12 millionaires who had built their lives on strategy and survival now formed an unspoken circle of protection around a 6-year-old girl. Emily sat in a chair too large for her, her boots not touching the floor, her fingers wrapped tightly around a paper cup of cocoa Victor had found in the staff kitchen. She didn't drink. She just held the warmth as though it were proof that this place was real. Sarah Mitchell flipped open her phone, set to airplane mode, and checked the time. We have less than 4 hours before the courts open. If we keep Emily here until then, we can file the emergency petition, but... A sharp crack shattered the air. It wasn't inside. It was outside. The sound of tires over curb, too sudden, too deliberate. Dr. Levin glanced toward the darkened lobby windows. We have company, he murmured. The building's external cameras, patched into a secure feed, blinked on the screen. 3 black SUVs idled at the curb, engines humming through the snow. Their headlights cut swaths of white against the glass. The rear doors opened in unison and men in dark coats stepped out. Not NYPD, not corporate auditors. Their gait had the casual menace of wolves who knew the territory belonged to them. Emily stiffened. She pressed back against her chair, her cocoa sloshing. It's him, she whispered. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. Richard? The front SUV's driver's side door opened. A man emerged, tall, shoulders squared, hair slicked back in a style that belonged to another decade, but survived because fear had preserved it. Richard Carter. He didn't look up at the cameras. Didn't need to. He strode toward the revolving doors as though he owned the building. Jonathan spoke quickly, voice clipped. Lockdown. Secure all entry points. Victor, Marcus, downstairs now. Don't engage unless necessary. Sarah, keep Emily out of sight. The group moved with the practiced precision of people who, though wealthy, had lived other lives. Military tours, courtroom battles, forensic investigations. Money had polished them, but scars had made them. Victor and Dr. Levin disappeared into the stairwell while Maya shut down the evidence laptop and slid the SSD into a lead-lined case. She tucked the USB inside her blazer pocket as though it were a heart she had sworn to protect. Sarah pulled Emily toward a side office. The girl's hand was ice in her own. "Stay with me, sweetheart," Sarah whispered. "No matter what happens, I'll be right here." The lobby cameras showed the security desk guard trying to intercept Richard. The man barely slowed, produced a badge, false, Sarah could tell even through the grainy feed, and muttered something lost to the microphones. Behind him, 2 associates scanned the walls like men casing a vault. "Cut the lobby feed," Jonathan ordered. "If they don't know we're watching, it's an edge." Maya hesitated. "They're armed," she said. "How many?" 3 visible. More could be in the cars. Jonathan exhaled through his nose. "We don't give them Emily. Whatever it takes." The elevator chimed. The sound was obscene in its normalcy, a cheerful note against the pulse of dread. Jonathan drew the emergency steel shutter controls and slammed them down. With a grinding groan, metal barriers slid into place across the conference wing. The tower had been designed for financial siege. Tonight it would be tested for something far more human. Emily clutched Sarah's sleeve. "He wants the kiddie drive," she whispered, as if confessing a secret to the snow itself. Sarah bent low. "I know." "And he won't get it. Not while we're here." The pounding began. A fist against steel, measured, mocking. Then Richard's voice, amplified by fury, carried through the barrier. "Jonathan," he called, "open the door. You've got something of mine." Jonathan stepped closer, his own reflection faint in the brushed metal. "She's not yours anymore." Laughter. Cold, rehearsed. "She's my blood. You think you can hide her in your glass castle? Do you know what's on that drive? You'll burn with me if it gets out." Sarah tightened her grip on Emily's hand. The girl's face had gone pale, but her lips moved with words she had been waiting years to say. She tugged free, stepped toward the shutter, and shouted with all the strength her small lungs could gather. "You killed Mommy!" The silence that followed was sharper than the scream. Even the storm seemed to pause. On the other side of the barrier, Richard's tone shifted from rage to venomous calm. "Careful, Emily. Words can disappear, just like people." Sarah pulled her back, wrapping her arms around her trembling frame. Jonathan signaled the others to hold. His pulse hammered, but his voice was steady. "You're not leaving with her, Richard. Not tonight. Not ever." The pounding resumed, harder, as though rage itself could dent steel. But inside Conference B, something unbreakable had already formed. 12 shareholders, a child with a backpack, and the truth that had walked through their door. This was their fortress now. The darkness had arrived. And for the first time in years, Richard Carter found a wall he could not buy his way through. The building seemed to breathe with them, slow, shallow, every wall holding its breath. Snow battered against the glass facade 40 floors above Midtown Manhattan. But inside, the storm had already arrived. Jonathan Whitmore stood with his back to the sealed steel shutters, eyes fixed on the control panel. The men outside were professionals. They wouldn't keep pounding forever. They would find another way in. Victor Hale's voice crackled over the secure radio from the lobby. 2 more armed men just came in from the side entrance. They're sweeping the atrium. Time's short. Jonathan pressed the transmit button. Hold position. We're not losing her. Emily sat on a chair in the corner, knees pulled to her chest, the pink backpack hugged tight. Sarah crouched in front of her, murmuring words like a spell. Safe, protected, not alone. But Emily's wide eyes never left the shutter, as if she could see her father's shadow breathing just beyond. The first breach alarm wailed. Jonathan's head snapped toward Maya. "Stairwell access," she said, typing furiously on the air-gapped laptop. "Someone's overriding the fire doors." Dr. Levin, still in his suit, rolled up his sleeves. "We're not waiting to be cornered." Jonathan looked around the room at his unlikely council of millionaires, finance titans, legal minds, surgeons, veterans, people who'd traded their old wars for boardrooms. Tonight, the past had returned. 60 seconds, Jonathan said. "If they're through the stairwell, that's all we have." Sarah lifted Emily into her arms. "We'll keep her low, behind cover." The pounding stopped. Silence spread, heavier than noise. Then came the hiss of hydraulics, a groan of metal straining. The shutter shivered. A black device was clamped on the hinges, a portable spreader. They were cutting their way in. "Now!" Jonathan barked. The next 90 seconds would decide everything. Second 1:15. Victor burst through the side door, shoulder slamming into the first intruder who had just breached the stairwell. The man went down hard, his weapon clattering across the marble. Dr. Levin pinned him with the same precision he once used in triage tents, forearm crushing against windpipe just enough to end the struggle. Second 16-30. 2 more men slipped past, guns drawn. Maya killed the lights with one keystroke, plunging the hall into shadow broken only by the red exit signs. Darkness turned the field even. Jonathan, who had boxed in his youth, stepped out of the conference room, caught the nearest gun arm mid-swing, and twisted. A shot fired wild, tearing into the ceiling. The man screamed as bone gave way. Second 31-45. Sarah pulled Emily under the table, whispering steady counts. 1, 2, 3. So the child's world had rhythm instead of chaos. Emily clutched the backpack and whispered back, 4, 5, 6. Even in terror, she kept count, as though proving to herself she existed. Second 46-60. Another attacker stormed through. Victor tackled him against the glass wall. The pain spiderwebbed but held. With a grunt, Victor slammed the man's wrist until the weapon dropped. Marcus Levin kicked it away, sliding across polished stone. Jonathan scooped it up and held steady, stance unshaken. Second 61-75. The spreader on the shutter sparked, metal whining. Richard's voice seeped through the gap. "Give me the drive, Jonathan, or the girl pays the price." Jonathan fired a single warning shot into the ceiling. "You step 1 inch through that door and you pay." The silence on the other side was answer enough. Second 76-90. Maya snapped a heavy case shut, the drive and the imaged SSD sealed inside. She slid it beneath the table, right into Emily's arms. "This is yours," she whispered. "You're the guardian now." Emily, trembling but resolute, whispered the words that froze them all. "Mommy said, keep the evidence safe, even if it scares you." At second 90, the shutter mechanism jammed. Sparks showered the floor. The attackers pulled back, retreating to regroup. The building alarms shrieked, echoing down the empty streets below. The council stood in silence, chest heaving, sweat dampening collars. Around them, fragments of glass glittered like ice. Jonathan lowered his weapon. "We held." His voice was hoarse but steady. "For now." Sarah emerged from under the table, Emily still in her arms. The girl's breathing was ragged, her face pale. But she whispered, as if to herself, "We won." Jonathan crouched beside her, meeting her fragile gaze. "Yes," he said quietly. "We did." The room smelled of gunpowder and fear. Yet within that stench lived something new, resolve, unshakable and fierce. For 90 seconds, the fortress of Whitmore Capital had been a battlefield. And for the first time, its wealth had been spent not in profit, but in defense of innocence. The storm outside still raged, but inside, a line had been drawn. The echo of gunfire lingered long after the last intruder vanished. Whitmore Capital's 40-story tower no longer felt like a temple of finance, but a fortress that had survived its first siege. Shattered glass glittered like frost on the marble floors, the steel shutters still scorched where the spreader had tried to bite through. Emily sat on Sarah's lap, her small fingers tracing the outline of the pink backpack as if drawing strength from its weight. Her wide eyes darted toward every sound, the hum of the HVAC, the tick of the recessed lights, as though each could be her father returning. "Stay with me, Emily," Sarah whispered, stroking the girl's hair. "You are safe." "Do you hear me? You are safe." Jonathan stood by the evidence case, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. He had weathered hostile takeovers and federal inquiries, but never had his body carried adrenaline like this, never had his empire felt so fragile. Then came the sound none of them could mistake. Sirens. This time not cartel SUVs, not mercenaries. Real sirens, NYPD, and behind them, black Suburbans with FBI stenciled on the doors. "Showtime," Maya said under her breath. The main lobby filled with uniforms and heavy boots, radios buzzing. Captain Alvarez of the NYPD's 17th Precinct strode in, a broad-shouldered man with salt at his temples. Flanking him was Special Agent Dana Ruiz of the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force, her black parka still dusted with snow. "Mr. Whitmore," Ruiz said briskly, "we received multiple emergency calls from this location. Reports of an armed incursion. Start talking." Jonathan glanced toward Emily. "Not here. Not in front of her." Sarah rose, still holding the girl, and faced the officials with a lawyer's poise. "This is Emily Carter, age 6. She is the daughter of Richard Carter, your prime suspect in half a dozen financial investigations you've never been able to close. Tonight, she came here carrying direct evidence." Ruiz stiffened. "Evidence?" Maya slid the sealed case across the table. "USB drive, image to an SSD under write block. Metadata preserved. Contains 3 years of offshore transactions, plus images and video documenting domestic abuse. Chain of custody logged from 0203 EST. Captain Alvarez frowned. "You're telling me a bunch of millionaires played evidence tech in the middle of the night?" Sarah's eyes flashed. "We played protectors. Emily's father sent armed men to take her and the files. If not for this group, she'd be in the trunk of an SUV right now." Ruiz studied them all in silence. Then she turned to Emily, softening her voice. "Sweetheart, is that true? Did you bring this here?" Emily's lips trembled. She nodded, clutching Sarah tighter. "Mommy said the W building was safe." The captain rubbed his jaw. "She needs to come with us. Protective custody until this can be sorted." "No," Jonathan said, firmer than he expected. "She stays here until family court opens. Then we file an emergency guardianship petition. I won't let her vanish into some system where Richard's lawyers can pluck her out with one signature." Ruiz raised a brow. "You're not her relative. You have no standing." "I do," Sarah cut in. "Article 6 of the New York Family Court Act allows temporary guardianship when a child is at imminent risk of harm. We can file at dawn. Until then, This is the safest building in Midtown. Alvarez shot a look at Ruiz. You're seriously considering leaving a child in a corporate penthouse guarded by hedge fund millionaires? Look around, Sarah said sharply. She has 12 witnesses, a sealed chain of custody, and a security system that just repelled a paramilitary incursion. Where else in this city is safer right now? The silence stretched. The storm rattled the glass. Finally, Ruiz nodded once. Fine, but at first light, she's coming with me to family court. No exceptions. You've bought a few hours, nothing more. Emily pressed her face into Sarah's shoulder, as if measuring the truth of those words against the warmth of the woman holding her. The rest of the night unfolded in fragments. Officers swept the building, bagging weapons dropped in the fight. Photographs were taken, statements scribbled. Victor gave a detailed account of the lobby confrontation. Dr. Levin described how he restrained one of the intruders. Maya outlined every digital protocol used. By 5:30 a.m., the tower was quieter. Emily had finally dozed off, wrapped in a blanket, head against Sarah's chest. Jonathan stood at the window of the penthouse suite, watching the sky shift from indigo to gray above the East River. The city was waking. For the first time in years, he felt like a man waiting not for market futures, but for the judgment of something deeper. Sarah joined him. I'll draft the petition. We'll argue best interest of the child, extraordinary circumstances, evidence of danger. If the judge grants temporary custody, we'll at least keep her out of Richard's reach until trial. Jonathan rubbed his temple. And if they deny it? Sarah looked back at the sleeping girl. Then she becomes another number in foster care intake. And God knows what Richard's lawyers will attempt. Jonathan's chest tightened. He had built a career on risk assessment, on calculating margins of loss. But this was no longer a ledger. This was a life. We don't fail her, he said. Not now. Not ever. At 8:15 a.m., they arrived at the New York Family Court on Lafayette Street. The snow had turned to sleet, hissing against the courthouse steps. Reporters clustered at the barricades, shouting questions about Whitmore Capital, about FBI raids, about rumors of a child witness. Flashbulbs flared. Emily clung to Jonathan's hand, dwarfed by the marble columns rising above her. She whispered, Uncle John, will the judge make me go back to him? Jonathan crouched, meeting her frightened eyes. Listen to me, Emily. The judge's job is to listen to the truth, and you've already been the bravest truth-teller I've ever known. The girl bit her lip. Then she nodded, holding his hand tighter. Inside. The petition was filed. Matter of Emily Carter. Emergency temporary guardianship. Sarah's legal voice rang across the chamber as she argued imminent danger. Best interests, chain of evidence. The prosecutor from the district attorney's office nodded grimly in agreement. Richard's lawyers, summoned on short notice, thundered accusations of manipulation. But amid the storm of voices, Emily sat quietly, her pink backpack at her feet. Inside it, the drive and the camera waited, silent witnesses to her story. For the first time since stepping into Whitmore Capital's lobby, she seemed to believe she might not have to run anymore. The family court hearing ended with a provisional ruling. Emily would remain in temporary protective custody under the supervision of Whitmore Capital until the next formal session. It was an extraordinary order, granted only because the child's father was in federal custody and because Sarah's legal fire had convinced the judge that placing her in foster care would be tantamount to painting a target on her back. When the gavel struck, Jonathan felt a weight shift across his shoulders. For years, courtrooms had meant liability, settlements, billion-dollar negotiations. This time, it meant a fragile thread of safety for a child who had trusted him without reason to. By evening, The penthouse at Whitmore's Upper East Side residence looked less like a monument to wealth and more like a hospital waiting room hastily transformed. Staff had brought in a child's bed, soft blankets, plush animals from a local boutique. But the walls were still high glass and steel, the furniture modern, sharp-edged, unfamiliar. Emily padded across the polished floor in socks too big for her small frame lost against the backdrop of Manhattan's skyline. She stopped at the window, peering out at the city that glittered beneath falling snow. Sarah crouched beside her. "That's Central Park down there," she said softly. "See the trees? In spring, they'll turn green again." Emily hugged her backpack tighter. "Mommy said spring means things come back, even if they look dead." Jonathan stood behind them, listening. The words hit harder than any market crash ever had. The first night was the hardest. Emily refused to eat. The kitchen staff prepared macaroni, grilled cheese, even a mug of hot chocolate piled with marshmallows. She shook her head at each offering, lips pressed tight. "It's all right," Sarah told her gently. "Your stomach is scared. It'll feel ready later." At midnight, Jonathan found her curled on the sofa, wide-eyed, clutching the pink backpack like armor. He sat in the armchair opposite, loosening his tie. "You don't have to sleep," he said quietly. "But you don't have to watch the door either. We've got that covered." Emily blinked at him, suspicious. "How many are there?" 12, Jonathan said. 12 people who promised to stand between you and anything bad." Her eyes narrowed, testing. "Even the monsters?" Jonathan swallowed. "Especially the monsters." She didn't smile, but her shoulders lowered, just enough for exhaustion to finally pull her into sleep. The second day brought nightmares. Sarah was the first to hear it, a muffled cry from the bedroom at 3 a.m. She rushed in to find Emily thrashing beneath the blanket, whispering, "No, Daddy, please." Jonathan followed, his hair disheveled, his face taut. He froze at the sight, an ache gripping his chest in a way that boardroom crises never had. Sarah touched the girl's shoulder. "Emily, wake up, honey. You're safe." Emily jerked awake, sobbing, clinging to Sarah with small, desperate fists. Jonathan stood useless, the most powerful man in the building undone by 6-year-old tears. Then Sarah looked at him, eyes hard but gentle. "Sit." He hesitated, then lowered himself onto the bed. Sarah shifted Emily toward him. The girl buried her face against his chest, shivering. Jonathan's hand hovered uncertainly before settling, awkward and tender, on her back. "It's okay," he murmured. "I've got you." The sobs quieted. Slowly, Emily's breathing steadied. Sarah caught Jonathan's eyes over the girl's head. For the first time, he saw not just a lawyer, but a woman carrying more than law books, carrying the patience of someone who had chosen to protect, no matter how messy it became. On the third day, small changes began. Emily ate half a grilled cheese. She let Victor braid her hair clumsily, laughing when his fingers fumbled. She listened as Maya showed her how computer code looked like secret alphabets. Dr. Levin sat with her by the fireplace, telling stories of medicine in faraway places. Emily tilted her head, wide-eyed. "You made broken people walk again?" He chuckled. "Sometimes. And sometimes they taught me how strong people really are." That night, Jonathan came home from a day of damage control, stock prices trembling, headlines screaming, investors restless. He expected silence. Instead, he walked into the penthouse to find Emily seated cross-legged on the floor, crayons scattered around, drawing towers with bright yellow windows. She looked up and for the first time whispered, "Uncle John." The words cracked something open inside him. He crouched beside her, his $1,000 suit brushing the carpet, and asked, "What's this one?" "Our building," she said. "But I made it a castle. Castles are safe." Jonathan nodded, throat thick. Yes, they are. By the end of the first week, the rhythm had changed. Board meetings paused for Emily's mealtimes. Conference rooms doubled as playrooms. A high-stakes call with Zurich had to wait while Jonathan sat at her bedside through another nightmare. The tower that once lived only for profit began to hum with something new. Sarah noticed it first. She stood at the edge of the penthouse one evening, watching Jonathan doze in a chair with Emily asleep against his chest. The girl's pink backpack rested at their feet, no longer clutched like a shield, but simply present, its burden shared. Sarah whispered to herself, almost in disbelief, "She's teaching us how to be a family." And in that glass fortress high above New York, the first fragile threads of belonging began to weave themselves into something neither money nor law could ever manufacture. The night settled over Manhattan with a cruel sharpness, the kind that carved silence into the streets and pressed against the glass walls of Whitmore Capital's tower. High above Midtown, in a room too large for a 6-year-old, Emily's small body burned with heat that frightened even seasoned adults. She hadn't touched her crayons that afternoon. By dinner, she barely ate a spoonful of soup. Now, past midnight, her skin radiated fever. Sarah was the first to notice. She pressed her hand gently against Emily's forehead. "She's burning up," she whispered. Jonathan was already moving toward them, his tie discarded, sleeves rolled. "How high?" Sarah slipped the digital thermometer beneath Emily's arm, humming a soft tune to distract her. A few seconds later, the beep confirmed what their hearts already knew. 103.2 Guidere. Dr. Levin, who had once treated soldiers in tents far from home, checked her lungs with a stethoscope. "No fluid. Viral. Not bacterial. But she's weak. She'll need constant monitoring." Jonathan's jaw clenched. "Then we monitor her." The night became a vigil. Sarah sat at Emily's side, dabbing her forehead with a cool cloth. "Maya brought ice water," Victor read aloud from a children's book in a voice softer than his trading floor growl. Even the sharpest legal and financial minds in New York learned the rhythm of wiping sweat, checking pulse, whispering comfort. Emily tossed, mumbling fragments of nightmares. "Mommy, don't let him find me." Jonathan hovered, his hand twitching as though to reach for her but stopping short. Sarah noticed. "Talk to her," she urged quietly. "Your voice matters more than mine right now." Jonathan hesitated. He had closed deals worth billions with words, but here, he was terrified of saying the wrong thing. Finally, he sat down. "When I was your age," he began softly, "I used to hide under the covers during storms. My mother told me thunder was just the sky reminding us it was still there. I didn't believe her, but somehow I slept." Emily's eyes fluttered open, dazed but listening. "Uncle John, are you watching too?" Jonathan swallowed, his chest tightening. "Yes, Emily, I'm watching." At 1 in the morning, the fever spiked, 104 degree F. Dr. Levin gave medication, then ordered cool compresses. They worked in shifts, though no one truly left. Maya closed her laptop. Victor brewed coffee. Sarah sang a lullaby that cracked mid-verse. Jonathan didn't move from his chair. He held Emily's hand whenever she stirred, whispering steady words. "You're safe. We're here. Rest now." At 3:15 a.m., Emily's body jolted with a dream, her hands clawing at the sheets. Without thinking, Jonathan caught her fingers in his own, strong but gentle. "Shh." he murmured. "You're not alone anymore." Gradually, her breathing evened. By dawn, the fever had broken. Emily lay limp but cooler, her face damp from the night's battle. She opened her eyes and saw something extraordinary. 12 adults, powerful men and women, asleep in mismatched chairs and couches, heads tilted back, coats draped over them like makeshift blankets. They had stayed. Every one of them. Sarah's cheek rested on the mattress. Jonathan was on the other side of the bed, his large hand still clasped around Emily's tiny one. Her lips trembled with effort. "Are you really my family?" Jonathan's eyes opened slowly. He looked at her, exhaustion etched deep, but his gaze was unwavering. "If you'll let us be," he said softly, "then yes, Emily, we are." The words seemed to loosen something inside her. She drifted back to sleep, a faint smile touching her lips, the first in weeks. The city outside woke to another winter morning, indifferent to what had happened in the tower. But inside, something irreversible had shifted. The Whitmore Council, titans of law, medicine, finance, had spent a night not as strategists or shareholders but as guardians. They had not calculated profit or loss. They had kept watch, together, like parents. And though Emily would not remember the precise words spoken that night, she would always remember this. When the fever raged and the monsters of her dreams returned, no one left her side. The fever night faded into memory, but its aftershocks lingered. By the following week, Whitmore Capital no longer moved at the same rhythm. A fortress of glass and steel had bent quietly toward the fragile orbit of a single child. Emily woke each morning to find one of her 12 guardians waiting with breakfast. Some tried oatmeal, others pancakes, still others hot chocolate. Each attempt was less about food than reassurance. You are not alone when the day begins. And then, slowly, the building itself began to change. It started in the boardroom. Victor Hale arrived one morning with rolls of butcher paper and watercolor sets. He covered the polished mahogany table once reserved for market forecasts. By lunchtime, charts and projections had been replaced with Emily's brushstrokes. Skylines with smiling windows, castles with tall gates, stick-figure guardians wielding bright yellow swords. "Best quarterly report I've ever seen," Victor quipped, hanging one on the wall. Jonathan, pausing at the doorway, felt something shift in his chest. For decades, his company's walls had displayed only numbers. Now they bore a child's imagination, and somehow it felt more permanent than any graph. On the 12th floor, Maya Chen carved out a new space. She transformed a disused conference room into a learning nook with beanbags, storybooks, and a child-sized desk. Emily dubbed it the secret library. "She's teaching me how to code," Emily announced one afternoon, typing slowly as Maya guided her through basic commands. "Strong passwords are like strong doors, right?" "Exactly," Maya smiled. "And you're the one holding the keys." Dr. Levin chose the rooftop. Once reserved for champagne receptions, it became a small sanctuary of herbs and seedlings. Emily learned how to water mint, basil, and lavender. "See this one?" Levin said, pointing to a fragile sprout. "It looks delicate, but its roots are stronger than you think." Emily touched the leaf carefully. "Like Mommy said, things grow back in spring." Levin nodded, hiding the ache in his throat. The shifts didn't go unnoticed. Analysts who dialed into Jonathan's meetings were surprised when he excused himself for Emily's mealtime. Traders waiting on Zurich deals discovered the CEO wouldn't start a call until a bedtime story was finished. The press took notice. Journalists began to gather outside, photographing murals Emily had painted on the lobby's glass panels, rainbows and knights drawn in bright colors. Headlines emerged. From hedge fund to haven, Whitmore Capital's unexpected mission. The fortress of finance learns the language of care. And then came the letters. They arrived in envelopes scrawled with children's handwriting, sent from boroughs across the city. Thank you for protecting kids like me. My dad yells too. I wish I had nights. Please don't stop. Jonathan spread them across the boardroom table, stunned. We thought we were helping one child, he murmured. Now the whole city is asking us to help many. Sarah answered softly. Maybe that's what Grace meant when she told Emily to find the W building. She knew this place could be more than profit. The shareholders gathered one evening not to discuss margins but to vote. Unanimously, they created a new foundation, Little Warriors. Its mission? To provide safe housing, therapy, and legal aid for children escaping violence. Funds would be drawn not from charity galas but from the very accounts once reserved for offshore shelters. No more shadow ledgers, Victor said. Every dollar redirected to kids like Emily. Clean, visible, accountable. Jonathan corrected him gently. Not just clean money, purposeful money, legacy money. Emily, curled on a chair nearby, looked up at the words. Little warriors? She echoed. Like me? Sarah knelt beside her. Exactly like you. By the end of the month, Whitmore Capital looked unrecognizable. The boardroom walls bore children's paintings. The cafeteria hosted a donation corner for toys and clothes. The lobby displayed not only tickers but also Emily's photographs of flowers sprouting on the rooftop garden. Staff began to volunteer at shelters on weekends, wearing pins that read, Nights in Finance. One evening, as Emily prepared for bed, she pressed her backpack against her chest and whispered to Sarah, It feels safer here every day. Like the storms are farther away. Sarah tucked the blanket around her, her voice steady. That's because you've turned this tower into something stronger than storms. Jonathan lingered in the doorway, listening. He understood then. It wasn't his leadership or their wealth that had changed Whitmore Capital. It was Emily, the child who had brought evidence of crimes, and, without knowing, evidence of what they all lacked, a reason to fight for something beyond themselves. The tower was no longer just a fortress of profit. It had become a sanctuary, a place where strangers had learned to stand together, not for balance sheets but for a child's tomorrow. And though the city saw only headlines and murals, those inside knew the truth. Emily Carter had transformed them, not by asking for wealth, but by asking for protection. And they had answered. Snow returned to New York the morning the trial began. Lafayette Street was choked with slush. Reporters pressed shoulder to shoulder behind barricades. Camera flashes turned the courthouse steps into a lightning storm. The city knew this wasn't just another custody battle. It was a collision between one of Manhattan's darkest businessmen and a fortress of millionaires transformed by a single child. Inside, the marble corridors of New York Family Court pulsed with tensions. Bailiffs kept order as attorneys shuffled binders and whispered strategies. Sarah Mitchell walked at Jonathan's side, her expression composed but her knuckles white around the case files. Behind them, Emily clutched her pink backpack, a ribbon in her hair trembling with each anxious step. Jonathan leaned down. You don't have to speak today, unless you want to. Emily looked up, eyes steady. I want to. Mommy said monsters hate the truth. The courtroom itself was a cavern of oak and shadow, presided over by Judge Patricia Williams, stern, seasoned, her robe hanging like armor. She had seen thousands of families torn apart, but nothing quite like this. A child escorted by billionaires, her evidence capable of reshaping Wall Street itself. The prosecutor opened with stark words. Your Honor, we present incontrovertible evidence of domestic abuse, financial crimes, and direct danger to the welfare of Emily Carter. We ask the court to grant permanent guardianship to those who have protected her since the night she fled. Richard Carter's lawyers shot to their feet, voices sharp with outrage. This is absurd. My client is the girl's biological father. The so-called evidence was obtained illegally, handled by untrained civilians, and should be inadmissible. What we see here is a corporate spectacle designed to distract from Whitmore Capital's own scandals. Judge Williams raised a hand. Counsel, lower your voice. This is a courtroom, not a press conference. Sarah rose next. Calm, deliberate, her voice carried the weight of both law and lived compassion. Your Honor, this is not about stock tickers or headlines. It is about one child. On February 3rd, Emily Carter entered Whitmore Capital carrying a backpack with evidence her mother had gathered. She carried it because her father had silenced every other adult in her life. That night, 12 individuals, none related by blood, stood between Emily and men with guns. And since then, they have given her food, shelter, therapy, and safety. That is what family is. She placed a folder on the bench. Inside are psychological evaluations conducted over the past 6 weeks, documenting Emily's progress, her nightmares reduced, her appetite restored, her education resumed. Progress achieved not in foster care, not under state custody, but within the walls of Whitmore Capital, transformed into her home. The defense countered with venom. A skyscraper is not a nursery. These so-called guardians are profiteers. How long before this child becomes the face of a PR campaign? How long before her story is monetized, sold, traded like a commodity? Jonathan stood then. He had not planned to speak, but the words came with a force he couldn't contain. Your Honor, he said, voice steady. For most of my life, I measured worth in profit. Then a little girl walked into my building and asked strangers to protect her. Since that night, I have learned there is a greater wealth, to be trusted by a child. I would burn every dollar I have before I let her down. The courtroom stilled. Even Judge Williams leaned back, eyes unreadable but softened. Then came the moment no one expected. Emily asked to speak. A hush fell as she walked to the witness stand, her pink backpack bumping against her knees. Sarah guided her up the steps, whispering reassurance, then stood back. The judge bent forward, voice gentler than before. Emily, you may tell us whatever you feel you need to. The girl gripped the microphone with both hands. Her voice wavered at first, then steadied like a flame resisting wind. I used to hide in my closet when Daddy yelled. Mommy told me if something ever happened to her, I should run to the W building because people there fight with words and money. She said one day, someone would believe me. That night I ran, and they believed me. She glanced back at Jonathan, Sarah, and the others sitting behind her. They stayed when the monsters came. They stayed when I had nightmares. They stayed when I got sick. That's family. I want to stay with them. Tears blurred the courtroom. Even a bailiff coughed to mask emotion. Richard shifted in his chair, his face twisted with rage, but his power was unraveling with every word his daughter spoke. Judge Williams tapped her gavel once. Thank you, Emily. The closing arguments barely mattered after that. The truth had already taken root. When the judge returned from chambers, the room held its breath. This court recognizes that biology alone does not define family. Safety, trust, and love do. Effective immediately, guardianship of Emily Carter is granted to Jonathan Whitmore and the collective board acting as co-guardians. This arrangement will be reviewed annually, but remains in effect until further order. Additionally, the evidence presented will be forwarded to federal prosecutors for criminal proceedings. The gavel struck. Emily gasped, then broke into tears, not of fear, but of release. Jonathan gathered her into his arms, holding her as if anchoring them both. Around them, the shareholders embraced quietly, their wealth and power for once humbled before the simple triumph of a child's voice. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. But Emily didn't shrink this time. She stood on the steps, her small hand in Jonathan's, her backpack on her shoulders. When a journalist shouted, "Emily, what does family mean to you now?" she smiled shyly and answered, "It means they don't leave." The words ran in headlines across New York by nightfall, and the tower that once symbolized only profit now stood as a beacon of something more enduring. A year had passed since the gavel fell in Judge Williams' courtroom. The snow had returned to New York, but in the Whitmore Capitol Tower, the air was different now. Where once the marble halls echoed with hurried footsteps and clipped orders, now laughter and music drifted, mingling with the rustle of crayons across paper and the hum of small feet racing down corridors. Emily was 10 years old. Her backpack, still pink but now adorned with new patches and stickers, no longer carried knives or bloody towels. Instead, it was filled with notebooks, pencils, and a second-hand camera she used to capture the world as she saw it. Moments of joy, faces of kindness, the steady light of trust, reborn. The Little Warriors Foundation had grown beyond anyone's imagination. What began as a pledge in the boardroom had blossomed into a network of safe houses, therapy programs, and legal aid centers across New York. Banners hung proudly in shelters. Family is where someone stands in front of the monsters for you. At the annual gala, held in the very lobby where Emily first stumbled in from the snow, hundreds gathered. Judges, teachers, survivors, children who had found refuge. The glass walls sparkled with fairy lights, but the centerpiece wasn't wealth. It was a gallery of Emily's photographs. One showed Sarah reading bedtime stories to children at a safe house. Another captured Victor, sleeves rolled up, helping teenagers paint a mural. A third, Jonathan himself, tie loosened, crouched in Central Park, holding the leash of a rescued golden retriever, while Emily laughed at his clumsy attempts to train it. Reporters swarmed, but the headlines had shifted. No longer about scandal, they now read, "Whitmore Capitol leads fight against child abuse. From fortune to family, a new legacy in Manhattan." That evening, Jonathan stood at the podium. The skyline glittered behind him, the hum of cameras quiet for once. He looked not at the crowd, but at Emily, seated in the front row, her backpack at her feet. "A year ago," he began, "this building was just glass and steel, a fortress for numbers, not people. Then a little girl walked in and asked us to protect her. In doing so, she taught us that power means nothing if it does not shield the innocent. She turned us from shareholders into guardians, from a corporation into a family. And tonight I tell you this, Little Warriors is not charity. It is debt repaid. It is purpose discovered. It is the legacy Emily gave us." The applause rose like a tide, but Jonathan only saw the tears shining in Emily's eyes. Later that night, away from the noise of the gala, Jonathan and Emily stood together on the rooftop garden. The city sprawled beneath them, snowflakes spinning in the wind. Emily clutched her camera and pointed it toward the skyline. "Hold still," she said, giggling. "I want a picture of you, Uncle John." He smiled, awkward in his tuxedo. "Why me?" "Because Mommy said one day I'd find people who wouldn't leave, and when I did, I should keep proof." She snapped the photo, the flash bouncing off his glasses. Then she lowered the camera, serious now. "You're my proof." Jonathan knelt, eyes level with hers. "And you're mine." She tilted her head. "Proof of what?" "That there's more to life than deals. That the greatest legacy isn't a company or a fortune. It's the love we leave behind." Emily leaned into his arms, the city's cold forgotten. For a long moment, they simply breathed together, the silence filled with everything they no longer needed to say. The next morning, Emily left for school, her first full year in a place where she wasn't the girl hiding bruises, but the girl with the camera, the girl who told stories, the girl who had 12 nights watching over her. Her pink backpack bounced as she walked through the tower lobby, waving to staff who had become her extended family. Jonathan watched her go, pride and awe swelling in equal measure. Once his life had been measured in profit margins and court settlements. Now it was measured in mornings like this, ordinary, sacred, a child going to school with hope instead of fear. Sarah joined him, files in hand. "The foundation has requests from Boston and Chicago," she said. "They want to replicate the model." Jonathan smiled faintly. "Then we'll help them. Emily didn't just change us, she's changing the world." Sarah studied him for a moment. "She gave you a second life, John." He nodded slowly. "No, she gave me a first one." That evening, after school, Emily returned with new photographs, classmates grinning, a stray cat curled on the sidewalk, a teacher writing hope in big letters on the blackboard. She laid them out on the table, proud. Jonathan studied them, his chest heavy with gratitude. In her eyes he saw Grace Carter, the mother who had trusted strangers to save her child, and in her smile he saw the promise of every child who would follow. He gathered the photos into a folder marked Legacy. Not balance sheets, not mergers, just truth. And as snow drifted against the tower's glass, Whitmore Capital stood no longer as a fortress of finance, but as a beacon of healing. Proof that even in the heart of Manhattan, family could be rebuilt, innocence could be defended, and love could turn steel and glass into home. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this heartfelt story. If it touched your heart, please subscribe so we can continue to share more journeys of healing and inspiration. Every subscription is a reminder that love and kindness are still alive in this world.